Last few weeks, we've been looking into the toxic drug crisis in Canada. Today, we're exploring legislation some provinces have adopted to deal with it, legislation that some others would also like to see.
You take a walk down on Livingston, you take a walk downtown. It's like zombies. They're walking around. They're lost. But there are children. We can't leave them down there. No. We gotta help them. There needs to be a law that I can take her and help her and put her somewhere that she can't sign herself out of.
That is a Newfoundland mother speaking at a rally in St. John's this past summer. There are calls in that province to introduce involuntary treatment for addiction. On the other side of the country, Alberta already has a program that allows parents and guardians to ask a court to order a child into treatment for up to 15 days at a time. And the province is considering legislation that would force adults into treatment as well. It's part of Alberta's approach to the current drug crisis. The province is spending millions on treatment centres, but the Premier says she does not believe in safer supply. To talk about Alberta's approach, Dan Williams is Alberta's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. Welcome to the House.
Thank you, Catherine. Very happy to be here.
To start, I'd like you to help us understand why go all in on treatment and not give people a range of options?
Well, I think it is important to consider the nature of what these tragic situations are. The deadly disease of addiction is just that. It's deadly. When addiction runs its course, we know there are only two ends. Given time, either it ends in pain, misery, and death, or the addiction comes to treatment, recovery, and a second lease on life. There's no third option. And so we have lots and lots of tools in our toolkit. And Alberta's building this Alberta model, the continuum of care that allows us to meet people where they're at, but bring them into recovery. So we have lots of other aspects of what we look at, everything from our virtual opioid dependency program, which is same-day medical treatment access for evidence-based medication for what they call OAT, or opioid agonist therapy. So that's Suboxone and methadone. But every bit of our system is being geared towards recovery.
So let's dig in a little bit deeper to what you're doing on the recovery front. Your province has promised to build 11 treatment centres. The last I had heard, there was only, I believe, one that has been opened so far. So how long do you expect it to take to fully get this Alberta model up and running?
Great question. And it is a long process in the sense that we're starting from scratch. Within Canada, and I'd say North America generally, maybe the whole West, the monopolist view on policy surrounding addiction has been going further and further down one road. And Alberta is taking a different tack.
Are you saying everyone's getting it wrong, Minister? I mean, that seems to be inherent.
I'm saying for a long time, we only looked at one possible solution, and we didn't seriously consider as a society what it takes to overcome addiction. And I'd put Alberta, along with many others, in that camp where we were not seriously considering what is the policy outcome if we don't get people recovery. If we don't try and help people who are in that deadly cycle of addiction, we will continue to see more addiction, more pain, more overdoses, more death. The way to break it, inevitably, and I don't know any other alternative, it's treatment and recovery, especially when we talk about the nature of the opioid and really hard drugs like methamphetamine.
I do want to get into the sort of either or that you're setting up here, but I just want to make sure that we fully grasp what it is you're doing on the treatment front, because we have been talking about this issue for some time on the show, and everyone we speak to agrees on the importance of treatment. Mm-hmm. You just said it's a long process, but you're also saying that this is what's needed to, in your view, fix this issue, is this massive emphasis on treatment. So how long are we talking here before you really have realized this vision?
So Alberta's planned 11. The vast majority of those are in the process of being built, or the contracts and logistics being set up so we can get those projects delivered. 2 are currently open. It does take time to get it going. And I need everyone to understand as well, once we have the recovery spaces, my goal is to build to the point where there's no longer a wait list. In Alberta, you could wait anywhere from a couple of months to a couple of weeks to get into treatment. That's too long, because when somebody decides that they want to get treatment, it's a short window often. Because of the nature of an addiction, especially an opioid one, there's a certain hold. You're compelled in so many ways physiologically to continue looking for that high. So if somebody has a moment of clarity...
So, sir, let me ask you, though, when someone, before that moment of clarity, when someone is in that moment where they are still deeply in the throes of addiction and they do not feel ready to seek that treatment, we heard from people who are working with people in active addiction that what they need is something to keep them away from the toxic drug supply, the drugs that have things in them that they are not expecting, which is leading to the dramatic rise we're seeing in overdose deaths. So why not have alternatives for people who aren't ready for treatment yet?
Well, first, Catherine, I have to challenge that phrase toxic drug supply. The truth is that all of these drugs are toxic. All of them lead to overdose, whether we're talking about hydromorphone, which is included in the so-called safe or safer supply. It's not safe.
So when the Public Health Agency of Canada says toxicity of supply continues to be a major driver of the overdose crisis, when they say that 81% of all deaths involve fentanyl, you just dispute the premise?
I believe that those individuals are seeking a high because of their addiction. If we replace the problem of describing it as a toxic drug supply with instead the problem is addiction, which is a biological disease which needs treatment, the solution ends up being recovery. What those individuals are doing when they talk about a toxic drug supply is they're activists and they're advocating for a safe drug supply as the alternative. They are not neutral in their argument. They're saying that if we provide high-powered opioids like hydromorphone, which for the record is 5 times more powerful than street heroin, then that will solve the problem. Because the problem is the addiction itself, the addiction is the disease, and that is sadly what's killing so many of our family members, I can tell you now it will not solve a problem.
Okay, let's explore further this question about how you are dealing with the recovery aspect of this. There is a program in Alberta where children can be forced into treatment by the court for up to 15 days at a time. Your government is also looking at introducing involuntary treatment for adults as well. Some addiction experts have said involuntary treatment doesn't work. Here's Dr. Monty Ghosh, an addictions medicine doctor who does research at the universities of Calgary and Alberta. He says it's hard to say whether or not that will be effective, but I want you to listen to his main concern.
I think the biggest fear that I have is that it could potentially re-traumatize individuals. If we're forcing treatment to people, if we're forcing injections into them, if we're holding them against their will, if we're essentially incarcerating them, would that not lead to further trauma? And we know that trauma, again, is a direct link to causing more harms to the population, which then directly links to increased substance use.
So how would you respond to his concern that involuntary treatment might do more harm than good?
I would say, first of all, that we have precedent in the Mental Health Act in Alberta, and every single province and territory has parallel legislation that allows involuntary treatment or treatment orders for individuals with mental health issues that are very severe. And the criterion in a legal sense within that act in Alberta, which is constitutional, which there's no dispute that it's needed, is when someone is a danger to themselves or others. That's the same criterion and legal test I am proposing for this legislation. When we're talking about compassionate intervention, if somebody is a danger to themselves or others because of their drug use, then I have a couple of thoughts. The alternative to that treatment is harm. It's harm to themselves. It is not at all compassionate in any serious way to leave somebody, maybe a brother or a sister of ours, maybe an Indigenous woman from my northern constituency who's found her way to Edmonton in -40 weather, suffers from a psychosis, whether it's induced from the addiction or existed as a pre-existing concurrent mental health issue, living rough on the streets or in the bush. And she is in absolute agony and pain because of the nature of her total capture by this addiction and the drug that fuels it, to say that's some lifestyle or I'm afraid to help you. The alternative to compassionate intervention is if somebody has gone through every other alternative and they have no recovery capital left and they are a danger to themselves, overdosing potentially multiple times a week, potentially creating permanent brain damage from hypoxia of a lack of oxygen coming to their brain because of the overdoses over and over again, potentially danger to others. At that point, the alternative to living on the street and that death or that prison that they live in of their addiction is what I'm comparing the policy option to. And I don't know any reasonable Canadian that really thinks that it's compassionate or reasonable to leave those vulnerable Albertans and Canadians on the street.
I take your point that everyone I think, across the country would not like to see those people living on the street. I do think there's a debate about how to deal with that, but we only have a moment left. And there's one more thing I would like to ask you, because the Alberta model is something that's got a lot of attention from the federal Conservatives here in Ottawa. Would you support a Conservative federal government pulling all its funding from harm reduction to focus on treatment?
What I'd support is centering the system around recovery. I have all sorts of tools within the Alberta provincial toolkit that people would call harm reduction. The virtual opioid dependency program, DOORS, the app for those who are using, lots and lots of different.
Would you include supervised consumption sites in that?
Yeah, those are in the Alberta system, and I think most people currently consider that harm reduction. I'm not coming at this, and I want to be really clear. I'm not coming at this from a radical perspective or an ideological perspective. My concern is it's very, very clear that what we're doing isn't working as a society. Alberta has very good evidence and arguments to show that recovery is the only way out the other end of this, and that includes a wide spectrum of tools. I want anybody on my team, left, right, from any part of the country, north, south, east, or west, that wants to see recovery for those who are suffering from that deadly disease of addiction. If instead your goal is to continue facilitating with no attempt to get them better, without moving them towards recovery, without making that the center of the system, then I will oppose that, because I think we have a moral obligation to those who suffer and to the public safety of our communities to say that we won't stand for that.
We're going to have to leave the discussion there. I appreciate your time today, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on the House.
Dan Williams is Alberta's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.